Tada, it was raining that night. The kind of rain that doesn't wash things clean but leaves everything heavier. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, my laptop still open, the termination email glowing like a wound I couldn't close. Position eliminated due to restructuring. Such polished words for such an ugly ending. I had given 5 years of my life to that company, late nights, skipped meals, forgotten birthdays, and yet, it ended with a single line and no apology. Tada, when Dad called, I thought maybe he'd understand. Maybe he'd tell me to rest, to breathe, but his voice, sharp and disappointed, sliced through the static. I told you, you should have been more practical, you never listen. You've always been useless when it really matters. I didn't argue. I couldn't, my throat had turned to glass. And then, as if the universe wasn't done breaking me, my husband, Ian, walked in. His expression wasn't anger or sympathy. It was indifference. I can't do this anymore, he said quietly, almost rehearsed. You're just not the woman I thought I married. Dada, he left without looking back, and the door's click felt louder than thunder. For hours, I sat in silence, the city lights bleeding through the curtains like tired stars. Everything I'd built, career, family, identity, crumbled in a single night. Dada, but pain has a strange rhythm. It whispers before it screams. That night, somewhere between the tears and the storm, I realized something. They hadn't just taken things from me. They had freed me. Tata, and when freedom comes disguised as loss, it teaches you how to burn without turning to ash. To grief is supposed to make you soft. It's supposed to drown you quietly until you forget how to fight, but mine burned. The morning after that night, I woke up with my eyes swollen and my soul hollow. The rain had stopped, but my world hadn't cleared. My inbox was empty, my phone silent. The house, too clean, too cold. Every sound echoed like a reminder of what was gone. I walked through the rooms like a ghost haunting my own life. The mug Ian used every morning still sat by the sink. His cologne lingered in the air like an afterthought. I could almost hear him laughing on the phone with someone who probably already knew I'd failed, because failure travels faster than truth. It's the gossip people love most. For a moment, I wanted to disappear, to pack a bag and vanish, to make their lives easier by erasing mine. But then I caught my reflection in the mirror, hair tangled, eyes bruised with sleeplessness. Yet behind all that ruin, something else stared back, something that hadn't died yet. A quiet, steady anger. It wasn't the wild, screaming kind. It was patient, focused, the kind that waits. I realized that night didn't end me. It introduced me to a version of myself I'd buried beneath obedience, politeness, and fear. The girl who once wanted to prove her worth was gone. The woman who would demand it had just awakened. I made coffee, sat at the table, opened my laptop, not to beg for another job, but to plan. If they thought I was useless, I would show them what useless looked like when it learned how to rise. Because sometimes, the best revenge doesn't start with rage, it starts with clarity. Revenge doesn't start with fire, it starts with silence. The kind that listens. The kind that memorizes every bruise, every word, every betrayal until it forms a plan so precise, it feels like poetry. That morning I made a list. Not of names, but of moments. Every humiliation, every door slammed, every time someone mistook my kindness for weakness. Each one a thread I'd pull when the time came. I started with my old company, the place that used me until I was replaceable. I knew its secrets, its blind spots, its quiet corruption. The CEO, Mr. Khanna, had always said, "We're a family here. Families don't erase people overnight." But I knew what they hid behind their glass walls. I had the emails, the numbers, the things no one ever checked because I was too loyal to question. Next came Ian, my husband, the man who loved me when I was convenient and left when I was human. I didn't want to hurt him. Not at first. But then I remembered how he looked at me that night. Like I was something he'd outgrown. And suddenly, I wanted him to see what it feels like to be discarded. To have your world rearranged by someone else's decision. I took a freelance project under a new name, something quiet, forgettable. Worked at night, ate little, spoke less. For weeks, I disappeared from the world. Everyone thought I was broken. But broken things, when rearranged with intention, become weapons. One night, as I closed my laptop after another long shift, I whispered to myself, they built their peace on my silence. And then I smiled. Because silence, when it learns how to speak, can sound a lot like thunder. It began small. So quiet no one noticed. That's the art of revenge, you don't announce it, you unfold it. I spent weeks studying every crack in their perfect facades. My old company was the first target, not out of hate, but justice. They had fired dozens before me, hiding their greed behind polished press releases. I had seen the emails, the unreported bribes, the contracts signed under fake subsidiaries. Back then, I was too scared to question it. Now fear was a luxury I could no longer afford. One night, I sat in the glow of my laptop and opened an anonymous account. My fingers trembled, not from doubt, but from anticipation. I uploaded every document, every proof I'd collected over the years. Numbers don't lie. Emails don't forget. I sent them to the media, to government portals, to competitors who would use them as weapons. Within a week, the company that called me redundant was trending under fair corporate scandal. I didn't gloat. I watched quietly. As the headlines spread, as Mr. Khanna denied everything, as his empire began to crumble from the inside out, the same HR manager who'd sent me that termination email was now giving interviews about ethical concerns. Ernie had never looked so poetic. Then came in. I didn't go after him with scandal. No, his punishment would be slow or personal. He had always cared about appearances, about being admired. So I used that. The same online communities he once ignored me for. I joined them. Reinvented myself. I became someone magnetic, someone he noticed again. But by the time he did, he didn't recognize me. Revenge, I realized, isn't about making others suffer. It's about reclaiming the power they thought they destroyed. And I wasn't done yet. There's a gravity to vengeance that pulls at you, slow and inevitable. At first it feels righteous, like cleaning a wound, but then you notice how the blade that cut for justice begins to reflect your own face back at you. As the fallout from the company's exposure splintered reputations and rearranged fortunes, and as Ian's puzzled attention hummed at the edges of my new life, I caught myself smiling at headlines and savoring the small humiliations like trophies, and for the first time I had to ask, who am I becoming? The nights I had sharpened my plans were now crowded with a different companion, an ache that wasn't quite guilt and not entirely satisfaction. I found small moments where memory and triumph collided, passing the cafe where we'd once celebrated a promotion, and feeling my chest tighten with something that looked dangerously like regret. Receiving a message from a former colleague thanking me for speaking up and crying because justice was overdue, and feeling a strange, hollow pride that cost more than I expected. My revenge had already unbalanced lives. People lost jobs, alliances shifted, private faces flamed in public, and I had wanted that currency to feel like freedom, but freedom had a price. It demanded honesty. And honesty asked whether dismantling their safety nets made me safer or simply different. So I began to test myself with choices that had nothing to do with strategy. I called my mother and spoke for an hour about nothing. I watered the dying fern on the balcony. I opened old photos and let them burn into me like evidence of a life that once amused me. The mirror, when it turned, revealed not only a woman who could fight, but a woman who still loved, who still feared loneliness, who still needed to forgive herself for surviving. Revenge had taught me power, yes, but now it also taught me mercy's shape, a softer, quieter victory that would not come from breaking others, but from rebuilding what I'd thought was lost. The city had moved on. The headlines had dulled, the noise had faded, and yet inside me, the storm was only beginning to quiet. I would wake before dawn, the silence humming against my skin, unsure if it was peace or emptiness I was feeling. The world outside saw a woman reborn, stronger, untouchable. But what they didn't see were the quiet wars still raging behind my calm smile. The truth is, revenge doesn't end when your enemies fall, it lingers, asking, now what will you do with the power you took back? One evening, I found myself outside my father's house. It had been months since we'd spoken. His words, "You've always been useless," still echoed sometimes, but softer now, like a distant memory instead of a fresh wound. I stood at his gate, watching the flicker of the living room light. For a moment, I almost turned back, but something inside me whispered, closure isn't weakness. When he opened the door, he froze. I saw the confusion first, then the guilt hiding beneath his sternness. You look different, he said finally. I smiled faintly. Maybe I finally became what you didn't believe I could. We didn't talk about the past. Not directly, but there were pauses between his words that felt like apologies too proud to name themselves. And in that silence I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, but because I did. Carrying his disappointment had been my inheritance long enough. As I walked away, I realized revenge had changed me. It had stripped me bare, then rebuilt me with edges I never knew I had. But now I wanted something beyond payback. I wanted peace that didn't need destruction to exist. And to find it, I'd have to face one last ghost. Tao Dada Kosa I saw him again on a Thursday evening, outside a cafe we used to visit when we still believed in small forevers. Ian stood by the window, the same tilt in his shoulders, the same careless confidence. Only now it looked brittle, as if he'd been rehearsing a version of himself for too long. When he noticed me, his eyes flickered, surprise first, then unease, then something I hadn't expected, regret. He walked toward me slowly, his voice uncertain. You look different. I smiled, not cruelly, just honestly. I am. Zeta. We sat inside. The city murmured around us. Cups clinking, laughter fading in and out. He started to speak, to explain, to paint over the years with excuses that sounded practiced. I didn't interrupt. I watched his lips move, his hands fidget, the cracks in his confidence widening with every word. When he finally said, I never meant to hurt you, I met his eyes and answered, you didn't just hurt me, Ian. You unmade me. But that's the thing about breaking something. You don't get to decide what it becomes after. Tada. He fell silent. I told him about the job, the scandal, the quiet nights that turned into power. I didn't boast. I didn't accuse. I simply told him the truth, the kind of truth that leaves no room for pity. He listened, and for the first time, I saw the man behind his mask. Small, scared, human. Zhejiao. When I stood to leave, he whispered, you've changed. Tada. I paused, looking out at the darkening sky. No, Ian, I said softly. I just stopped being who you thought I should be. Ian. As I walked away, I realized my revenge was never about his pain. It was about reclaiming the story he abandoned. Tazaka. For months after that meeting, a stillness settled around me. Not the hollow kind that follows loss, but the grounded silence of rebuilding. I moved into a smaller apartment overlooking the city's heartbeat. It wasn't luxury, but it was mine. I started consulting for small firms, helping women who had been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. I taught them how to negotiate, how to read contracts, how to walk into a room and refuse invisibility. Each success felt like a piece of myself coming home. Zeta. Sometimes, I'd catch whispers about my old company, new management, ongoing trials, reputations quietly disintegrating. I didn't smile anymore when I heard, vengeance had already done its work. I didn't need to feed it. I had learned that power doesn't roar, it endures. Zeta. My father visited one day, holding a small bag of fruit, awkward and unsure. He looked around my apartment and said, I always wanted to see you stand on your own feet. I didn't remind him that he'd once kicked those feet out from under me. I just nodded. Maybe he'd learned too. Maybe we both had. Tedor and Ian, I heard he tried to start a business, that it failed, that he sometimes asked mutual friends about me. I didn't hate him anymore. He had been a chapter, a cruel, necessary one. But not the story. Zeta. One night, as the city lights shimmered like scattered promises, I sat by my window with a cup of tea, recording my thoughts for a podcast I'd started. The night I lost everything. Zeta. My voice was calm, steady. Sometimes life has to fall apart, I said into the mic, so it can rebuild you sharper. Sometimes losing everything is how you remember who you are. Tete. And as I pressed stop, I realized, this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my legacy. The first time I uploaded that podcast episode, I expected silence. Who would care about a stranger's unraveling? But by morning, my inbox overflowed. Messages from women and men who whispered their own versions of that night, the job loss, the betrayal, the slow awakening. Some wrote from small towns, some from cities that never sleep, all of them echoing one thing. You told my story before I could. Each episode I released was another piece of the truth, raw and unscripted. I didn't soften the pain, I let it breathe. And somewhere in that vulnerability, strength began to multiply. Survivors found each other. They shared, they healed, they rebuilt. I started receiving invitations to speak, small gatherings at first, then conferences, auditoriums. Each stage felt less like revenge and more like redemption. I remember one night after an event, a young woman came up to me. She couldn't have been older than 23, her eyes shimmered with the same fear I once carried. She said, my father calls me a failure too. But after hearing you, I think maybe I'm just starting. I hugged her, and in that moment, I understood, pain transforms best when it's shared. The media called me the Phoenix Speaker. I didn't ask for the title, but I wore it quietly, because maybe that's what I had become. Not the ashes of what they destroyed, but the fire that learned to rise from it. One night, scrolling through the messages, I paused at one from an unknown sender. It read, you turned your story into light. I was wrong about you. No name. But I didn't need one. Some apologies arrive not in words, but in silence. The kind that finally understands the damage it caused. Tata, and that night, I smiled. Not with triumph but with peace. The years have softened the edges of that night, but they've never erased it. Sometimes, when the rain drums against my window, I still hear echoes of the woman I used to be, fragile, frayed, waiting for someone to save her. Now I know no one comes. You save yourself, piece by trembling piece. The world that once broke me has become the world I now shape. The podcast grew beyond what I ever imagined. I founded a foundation for women starting over. Those who lost jobs, homes, names, dignity. We called it Reignite. Every story we helped felt like adding light to a dark map, small flames spreading in quiet defiance. Tada, one evening, I stood backstage before a global summit, my biggest audience yet. Thousands waited outside, but my heart was strangely calm. I looked at my reflection one last time. No makeup could hide the history in my eyes, the stories etched into every breath I took. When the lights rose and I walked on stage, the applause didn't sound like celebration, it sounded like recognition. Tata, I began with the same words that started everything. The night I lost my job, my father called me useless. My husband left, and I thought my life was over. The crowd went silent. I let the pause linger, then smiled. But that night didn't end me, it introduced me to myself. Tada, as I spoke, I felt something within me settle. Revenge had long since burned away, leaving only clarity. The quiet knowing that justice doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers through resilience. Tada, when I stepped off the stage, I didn't feel victorious, I felt whole. Tata, and as the rain began again outside, gentle, cleansing, I realized the truth I had chased for years. Does some nights break you only to rebuild you into the fire you were always meant to be? Cha.